Hi, everyone. My name is Meredith Newman. I am a reporter with the News Journal. I am joined here by my colleague, Sarah Gamard, who covers politics for us at Delaware Online. And today we're going to talk about all of the news that happened last night with Delaware's statewide primary. We're not going to talk about every single race that happened. So for all in-depth coverage, make sure to check out DelawareOnline.com to read stories written by Sarah, but as well as our other colleagues. And also, in order for us to do all of this great work, we really need the community to subscribe and to invest in local journalism, to do stories like Sarah has done and will continue to do in the coming months and years. So with that, Sarah, let's start with the Senate race. So Senator Chris Coons faced a primary challenger, Jessica Skrain, who is a part of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Tell me a little bit about the leading up to the election and what happened last night.
Yeah, so the Democratic primary between incumbent U.S. Senator Chris Coons and his progressive challenger, Jessica Skrain, reminded a lot of Delawareans of what happened in 2018 when Carrie Evelyn Harris, who was also a progressive Democrat, went up against Tom Carper, also an incumbent. And so when Jessica announced back in 2019 as Coons' progressive challenger, a lot of people were expecting what happened yesterday, which is for the race to end up a lot like Carrie Evelyn Harris's loss against Tom Carper. Carrie Evelyn Harris, I believe, got 35% of the vote back in 2018, and Jessica, I believe, got less than that.
I think it was in the high 20s. I want to say around
high 20s. So I actually just got off the phone with Jessica before we hopped on Facebook Live. So obviously she's disappointed. Obviously, these were not the results that she wanted. She tells me that she's, her path moving forward isn't clear cut yet, but because she's built a name for herself, she is thinking about pivoting toward state level issues, right? Like, implementing her progressive agenda, $15 minimum wage, aggressive, environmental protection, expanded healthcare, et cetera, all the things that you think of when you think of a progressive. She's thinking about focusing her efforts at the state level instead of the federal level now, which is what she would have done if she had won the Senate primary. So it's not, if you're looking at Coons's war chest, his campaign finance, his name recognition, his status as a moderate Democrat in a relatively moderate Democratic state, it's not shocking that he won last night, right? It is obviously disappointing to a lot of people who are very for this growing progressive movement. They wanted someone like Jessica to win. A lot of young people turned out yesterday. A lot of young people were working on her campaign. Obviously, this isn't the end for people like Jessica Skrain. And, she wasn't, while she did lose, I know we're going to talk about this later, but a lot of progressive candidates did win down the ballot at more local races. So it wasn't a huge loss for the movement.
And just to jump in, I think something else that, of course, this election is like no other, just because we are still in the era of COVID-19 and the pandemic. And so I imagine, I know she did door knocking in recent weeks, but she wasn't able to do maybe the traditional campaign tactics that one would do, especially at a grassroots level. But also a big difference from this year opposed to 2018 was there was never a debate between Coons and Skrain. So she wasn't, I imagine, able to introduce herself to voters and really show a difference between her views and Coons's views and his record in a way that maybe Carrie Evelyn Harris had or that Jessica would have liked to. And of course, Senator Coons has the support of Joe Biden, a beloved figure, a very influential figure here, still in Delaware politics. So that definitely played a factor. Before we jump to the General Assembly, because I know that was a big night, I think it's important to talk about the Republican challenger that Chris Coons will face. Tell us a little bit about Lauren Witkowski and what you expect to happen in the next couple of weeks leading up to the general election.
Right. Lauren Witkowski, she started coming into the public eye at the beginning of this year, shortly before the pandemic. She is, she's in her 30s. She's young. She doesn't have a lot of, she didn't, like Jessica, she didn't have a lot of political prowess when starting her campaign this year. What I think set her apart from her Republican challenger, Jim DiMartino, who was he was endorsed by the Republican Party. He was the pick by the establishment, is that she is very very active on social media. Her campaign strategy is appealing to people who are very disillusioned with the leftward movement of the Democratic Party. Her strategy is targeting labor unions who may not be happy with, the progressive movement, and they don't like where the Democratic Party is going, including in Joe Biden's camp. So she is kind of reminiscent of, some people have been comparing her to Christine O'Donnell, who,
right.
ran for the same seat in 2010, right? She's very incendiary. She's, not necessarily compared to Christine O'Donnell in this way, but she is not afraid to insult the people who are going up against her.
And I think it's important. I think it's important to note that Witkowski is a avid supporter of President Trump, and also has tweeted in support of QAnon, which, for those who might not know, is a debunked conspiracy theory. And she is one of a handful, if not less, of Republican candidates who have supported things regarding QAnon or have had links to believing in QAnon. So I think that's important for people to know. And Sarah, of course, wrote a more in-depth story about this. So again, another plug for our website here. Just to move on to the General Assembly, again, even though Jessica Green lost the highest prize of the night, I think there was some major wins for the Progressive Party in the General Assembly. Tell us about those wins and also the historic moments for Delaware.
Yeah, I mean, there were, last year we reported that there was this wave of younger progressive challengers who, are coming pretty much out of nowhere to challenge these longtime incumbents who have been in office since the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. I did not expect the results to be as sweeping as they were last night. We had, 7 lawmakers were facing a challenger. I believe they were all Democrats facing a challenger, largely in Newcastle County. 4 of those 7 lost to their seat last night. It's a pretty big deal and a testament to the changes of, Delaware politics, voters wanting, progress in the General Assembly instead of an allegiance to the Delaware way, one could argue. The 4 that lost their seats, which I think it's important to note, is primarily Senate President Pro Tem David McBride.
Tell us more about that race and who he lost to.
He's the most, just for people who don't know, David McBride, who represents part of Newcastle, is the most powerful senator in Delaware. He controls the chamber's schedules and therefore controls if and when bills get voted on. He got a lot of flack in 2019 for preventing 3 gun control bills from going to a floor vote, and therefore preventing it from any public discussion at all. They were highly controversial, and his decision was highly controversial. So his opponent, Marie Pinckney, who's 30 years old, she's a social worker. She campaigned on that. She campaigned on being a fresh option. Obviously she criticized McBride for those kinds of decisions. And McBride had not had like the other lawmakers who, like 2 of the other lawmakers who lost their seats last night, McBride hasn't had a primary challenger in a while. He hasn't had one since 1986. And so, these guys who lost, they're not used to having to fight for their seats. And then you add the coronavirus pandemic on top of all that. They're used to going out door knocking. They're used to meeting voters face to face. And these guys are in their 60s and 70s, and they're going up against these social media savvy progressive candidates who are better at navigating, canvassing from home. So,
and just to jump in before we get into the other candidates, because I think that's a really important point. Why, just from what you know about how those candidates who won last night in big wins campaigned, I guess, what about them do you think appeal to Delaware voters? I'm curious, do you think people are tired of the old guard, so to speak, of Delaware politics? The Delaware way is something that is tossed around a lot.
Well, that's
why do you think
right. That's definitely what those progressive challengers argue is why that's what they're going to argue is why they won. It's what they argue. It's what they argued before they won, is that voters are craving a fresher option. It could be more nuanced than that. Three of the three of the candidates went up against longtime incumbents, and that was their argument. Larry Lambert, who defeated Ray Siegfried over in North Delaware, he almost beat Siegfried back in 2018. He came 86 votes shy, and this time, he obviously did better because he defeated him. But the other three, there was Medina Wilson-Anton, who is a 26-year-old, and she was a former legislative staffer to the lawmaker that she defeated last night. She said she'd be the first Muslim lawmaker elected to the General Assembly if she defeats her Republican opponent in the general. She was campaigning on, hey guys, I worked in this building and it's really screwed up. We need to get some fresher faces in here. We need people who are not afraid to take hard votes. That was her style. Eric Morrison, who's in his 40s, he went up against Representative Earl Jakes and won last night. His strategy was actually unlike the other challengers, because he didn't stop door knocking. He had a socially distanced version of door knocking. He had a very aggressive campaign, and he actually outraised and outspent Earl Jakes, which the other challengers didn't. Even the other challengers who won weren't able to do. So, it also really, if you talk to local politicos here and political operatives, they'll tell you that each district is going to be different. Like, these are different personalities, it's different voters, and it's just a different dynamic, right? Some of them are just, their campaigning might have been more effective. Some of them, their messaging might have been more effective. Some of these lawmakers just might not have done a good job trying to keep their seats. We really don't know. We're going to be trying to find all those things out.
Right. And I think it's important to know that Eric Morrison, if elected, would be the first
openly gay man.
Right, yes. In the General Assembly. And also, again, in terms of national history, I guess, Sarah McBride won her primary by a very wide margin. And if elected, she's in a very Democratic district. But if elected, she would become the highest ranking transgender official in the country. And I saw she was getting a lot of love. She got a tweet of support from Hillary Clinton earlier this afternoon, comedian Amy Schumer. So it'll be interesting to watch her as she starts her political career as someone who already was pretty high profile, even become even more so.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can expect this. I think we can expect Sarah McBride's state senate. She's likely going to win just because I live in her district. Her campaign signs are all over the place, and her Republican challenger. It's hard for a Republican to win in this district, which is in North Wilmington, around Charlie Square, et cetera. But yeah, I think we can expect this to be the first chapter of a pretty long political career for her.
And let's talk about voter turnout. It was also history making, but again, of course, this was different from other years in terms of the role that mail-in ballots had. Tell us a little bit about that, and also what issues that our colleagues reported on last night.
Yeah, I mean, this was the first time, well, actually, excuse me, it's the second time that we had a statewide race where not only are voters, the registered voters in this closed primary, able to vote from home. Everyone was able to vote from home without providing an excuse because of the coronavirus pandemic. But it was also the second time that we have these new voter machines. So poll workers and people voting from home have had to get used to this new dynamic. And I think voting from home was very confusing for a lot of Delawareans. They had the option to vote by mail, by fax, by email for a short period. They were able to vote online this year. It was, I think it was a lot of options that might have overwhelmed people and confused them. Of course, they could have dropped their mail-in ballot over at the drop box. It was a lot of different moving parts, deadlines, ways that you could vote. It seemed like a lot of people still preferred to go vote in person. I mean, when we reported on the presidential primary back in July, I went out to a polling place. I think it was Brandywine High School. And, everyone there was very calm. They were wearing their masks. They had their hair sanitizer. They felt very, safe. They said they planned on going back in September and November. So, it's really just a new normal. Obviously, it should be no surprise that, Republicans came out at higher rates to the polls than Democrats. A lot of that has to do with trust in the mail and trust in mailing voting. Yeah, the USPS debacle into all
right.
that.
It should make for an interesting November, and how, and again, this has been an issue across the state. I asked the governor about this yesterday at his weekly press briefing, and he was talking about, the confidence that he has, but it's also the importance of people mailing in their ballots way before the deadline.
Right.
So just to wrap up here, let's talk about looking ahead to November. Again, obviously that's when we will find out who next president will be. But in terms of races here in Delaware, what people who won their primaries today, who are going to face difficult campaigns come November?
Well, I think the first one that comes to mind is our governor. He easily won against his Democratic opponent, David Lamar Williams, last night. He now faces a woman named Julianne Murray, who is also a newcomer. This race is going to be interesting because before last night, Colin Bonini was seen as the front runner. He ran again for governor. He had run in 2016, but I think one could argue that Murray who won last night is kind of a testament to how voters' priorities have changed drastically over the past 6 months. Bonini kind of tried to do a repeat of his 2016 campaign. He also started late, which you have to factor in his loss. But he had a very traditional campaign, very cordial, very reminiscent of what he had done previously. Murray is campaigning largely against Governor John Carney's coronavirus restrictions. That is really when you think about her campaign, that's the first thing that comes to mind. And that's largely what her messaging. So unlike anything that any Democratic governor has ever had to do, Governor John Carney is going to have to, see his reelection bid as kind of a referendum on his administration's response to the pandemic. Polls show that he's, Delawareans are largely approving of his response. Obviously, there's a lot of
there aren't many polls, but it is showing positive for him, right?
No, you can still argue that he's going to be fine. It's still a Democratic state. He's, he doesn't have some kind of scandal, which is usually the bane for politicians seeking re-election. But this is going to be, in terms of a difficult race, he's going to have to campaign on things that there's just no precedent for this. This is a very highly emotional, just contentious year in terms of just like simple things like wearing a mask or I don't know, but people have lost income. Their kids can't go to school. It's a very different year. And all of that, Governor John Carney is going to have to answer for. And the woman who's going against him, by the way, is suing him over some of those restrictions. So it's going to be, I think that dialogue is going to really be something to watch.
And do we know if they will have a debate? Has there been any conversation that you know of? I don't think we've reported anything.
I can't imagine that there won't be eventually, but we have, we have a little less than 2 months. I can't imagine that there's not going to be some back and forth between these two. Again, it's still a Democratic held state. Nearly half of voters are Democrats. Murray is going to have to do a lot of work to even get close to defeating the governor. And Chris Coons and Lauren Witkowski, they're going to go head to head. Again, she's targeting labor unions. She's targeting Democrats who are dissatisfied with the progressive movement. But Coons is a moderate. Coons is, in terms of Democrats, he won last night because he is a moderate. So
and a very well liked, from my understanding, politician.
Approved, I'm not sure. Really, I can't say that any of these Democrats really have too much to worry about. Someone who might have something to worry about is a senator up in North Delaware named Kathy Cloutier. She's just on the forefront of my mind because we had a Democratic primary for her seat last night. Kyle Evans-Gay came out on top. She's going to go head to head. Cloutier is seen as one of the most vulnerable Republicans in the Senate, but some of these other vulnerable Republicans are going to face challengers who didn't have to go through a primary yesterday. So, there's going to be some. I think the people who are in trouble. What?
A lot to watch.
Yeah, the people who I think are going to be in trouble are Republicans. The Democratic Party is really trying to creep in on some of these districts, but in terms of statewide races. So far, with my singular prediction, so far, Coons and Carney can expect to have support from their traditional base, but it is still going to be quite the campaign because it is going to be a bellwether for how voters are feeling and what voters are responding to in terms of these messages.
Right. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. I think that's all for us here. Again, for all comprehensive coverage of last night's primary election, make sure to head to DelawareOnline.com and please consider subscribing to our work. You investing in local journalism allows people like Sarah and me to ask hard questions, keep state officials accountable, and cover these elections tirelessly. So I think that's it for us here. For more stories, head over to DelawareOnline.com.
Thanks so much.